Hello and welcome back to HEMA Fight Breakdowns. Today I'm going to be reviewing the third place match at last weekend's AGO 2024 between myself and Aiden Witherspoon. Yes, I am only reviewing this fight because I am in it, but also because it was a really interesting fight with a lot of really good aggression from my opponent. I have fought Aiden before, and classically in this matchup, he tends to get me about 60-40% of the time. And the reason for that is because he's very effectively aggressive. He is not just charging at me, he is doing so methodically and intelligently. And as a defensive fighter, someone who is very good at offense tends to get the better of me, particularly because if you are good at being offensive, you can drive me into the corner, you can force me to block first, and as the texts say, a best offense generally overpowers a best defense. So let's look at the exchanges. So, as a little preface, this is actually not the first exchange, it is the second exchange, just in case you are wondering why I already had 2 points. But this exchange goes pretty close to how the first exchange went. Aiden comes in, throws a very nice attack onto my upper left opening. I parry it and attempt to throw a Zverkow as a counterattack. However, this time, Aiden has already begun to adapt to my bread and butter, Kron parry into left Zverk, and decides to lay his sword and his hands onto mine, 1, in order to block my counter left Zverk, but 2, in order to put me in a really, really bad situation for grappling. If you know anything about this particular setup, basically anytime someone throws a Zverkow, they have to rotate their body and their arms, and if you put pressure forward and especially down onto their weapons, what happens is you kind of force them into a hanging parry position, where their point is down, usually towards the ground, and they're not able, hopefully, to be able to pull their sword out and, throw any kind of meaningful cut or thrust. It's a really bad position to be in, but it's one that you necessarily have to put yourself in anytime you throw a Zverk from this middle range. So Aiden has done a great job of adapting to what he knows I'm going to do, and only misses a little bit in the sense that he is unable to get control of my right arm, and as such I'm able to pull it out and throw a pretty pathetic cut towards his head. This exchange was ruled nothing happened, as my cut to the head after I managed to free my right arm wasn't quite good enough, and Aiden, who had been trying that entire time to control both of my arms, never managed to push me out of the ring or do anything with his own blade. So for the next exchange, I am in a bit of a problematic area. Despite the fact that I am currently up on points, Aiden is already starting to work around his offense to cover my implicit defense. And going back to what I said earlier, the best thing about being the aggressor in every single exchange is that you know your opponent is going to either have to parry or get hit. And that's a really, really good situation for you to be in. Not a great situation for me to be in. So I have to make an adaptation here. And in my opinion, one of the best ways to get around someone who is being aggressive and taking control of the fight is to become a little bit aggressive yourself. You have to present a credible threat in the initial action, otherwise your opponent is just going to walk all over you. So that is what I do. The second the referee says go, I present my point forward and basically feint a little bit of a short edge shield how. But the thing here is that it's not really much of an attack at all, but it is enough, just in the presence of putting my point online, to get Aiden to stutter and to hesitate, just that little bit. And that little bit of hesitation is all I need to then launch my real attack. After my blade is presented forward, I threaten with that same kind of thrusting motion, duck under onto the offside, and attempt to stab Aiden in the shoulder or the arm. And it does work out for me. I get just a little bit of good presence, but the reason this really worked out for me isn't necessarily just that I thrusted him, but particularly because I did so outside range in the initial action, which caused Aiden to not throw an attack of his own the second I extended my arms. If he had done so, he probably would have hit me, and we would have doubled, which would not have been a great situation. But recognizing his hesitation, I ducked under, I went onto his offside, and basically put him in the situation that he was putting me in. A situation where he had to parry or he was going to get stabbed. Luckily, this time, I landed the stab, and his afterblow was parried by my not-so-great back parry. This is going to come up a little bit later, but I apparently have a really bad habit now of throwing my back to my opponent every time I parry on my right side, and it's going to come back to bite me in these next couple exchanges. On the next exchange, we have yet another adaptation from my opponent. Now that he knows that my goal is essentially to gesture with my sword in order to stop his offense, he is now just going to ignore those gestures. And again, this is a really smart thing to do. However, knowing this, my guess, and it really was just a guess, was that Aiden was going to try to do something similar to myself in this next exchange, meaning that his first gesture with his weapon was not going to be an attack at all, but a feint. And once again, my guess kind of paid off. Aiden does in fact feint on his first attack straight to my head, and instead pulls it back into an even higher vom tag to throw another attack down at my head. Lucky for me, I do not bite on this initial feint, and right out of this cron parry, which I only got halfway through doing, I throw a left zwerk, which I attempt to land and then cover my upper openings. However, I was not fast enough. After Aiden has done his feint and I am beginning to throw my zwerkow, he comes back down and comes right onto my hands, making this a double hit. Now, if you don't know, in this particular rule set, you got 3 double hits before you lost the match. But in the eliminations, you got 3 double hits before you started getting negative points towards your next match. But given that this was the 3rd place match, there was no match after this, which means we could double as many times as we wanted. It may not seem particularly important now, but it's important to note that in any other situation in this fight against Aiden, I might have been punishing myself, or both of us, in any fight we had further on, and this might have informed both my decision making and my opponent's. For our next exchange, instead of an adaptation, what we get is a regression on my side, because I have given up all the things that I have changed in the previous 2 exchanges and have gone right back to being way too defensive. Aiden does exactly what he should do in this situation and capitalizes on my overly defensive mindset with some combinations and some feints. What we first see from him is he throws an attack up high, as he's done pretty much every exchange up till now, and I go into my same old cron parry. But as he realizes that he is a little far out of range and I cannot throw my zwerkow, and I don't throw my zwerkow, Aiden follows up this attack with another cut over to the side, which I also parry. But I do so while backing up again and again, meaning that Aiden is still not in range to continue his attacks, but I am not in range to throw any meaningful counterattack. So Aiden now has another opportunity to start another attack and another combination, only this time he recognizes that I'm just going to stand there and parry, so he throws an attack that he feints and then throws a follow-up counterattack onto the opposite side. I am not fast enough to try to parry both of them, which means I don't make it in time and I get struck right in the head clean. This is a great demonstration on how somebody with an intelligent offense can almost always overwhelm someone with an effective or intelligent defense, because at the end of the day, no matter how good your defense is, it doesn't do anything for you until you can throw a counterattack. And if your opponent doesn't give you any openings, you never throw a counterattack and you just get your blade pounded on again and again until your defense finally fails. So the next exchange is another simple one. Simple because I once again failed to learn from my mistakes. In this exchange, Aiden comes forward with his attack, same as he has in every exchange previous, and I go to my cron parry, and instead of throwing a left zwerk, throw a wild mix-up of a right zwerk. Unfortunately, Aiden, who has already learned how to deal with this, throws his combination. The second he feels his blade touch mine, he throws an attack on the other side and manages to stuff that right zwerk out pretty effectively. On top of that, I am making another mistake, which I made previously, which is turning the back of the head every time I try to defend my right side. As I said before, this is going to come back to bite me, and this is where it's starting to do so. Because I turned the back of my head, I essentially gave up any opportunity I would have had of scoring a point, on top of the fact that because I am stuck in my defensive mindset still, I didn't even really have an opportunity to score a point. Aiden is starting to walk all over me, and if I don't make a change soon, he is going to continue to do so and win the fight. The next exchange is not much better than the last. However, I do something that is at least going to help me out further on in the fight. I throw an attack while Aiden is walking forward. And again, it might not seem like this is all that important, but the key thing here is that I need to slow down Aiden's offense. And anything I throw out, even something that gets blocked, is at least a section where Aiden had to block. Anytime Aiden is blocking, he's not attacking. And if he's not attacking, he's not steamrolling me. So, despite the fact that I throw a hand shot that gets easily parried, and then I get hit on the hands immediately after and give 2 clean points to my opponent, I can at least say that I'm starting to bail myself out of the very deep hole that I've put myself in. Although psychologically I might be getting a little bit better, I am not getting any better on points, as Aiden has once again started to take a commanding lead. The next exchange is again a simple one, but again one where we get to point out the psychology of what's going on here. Aiden walks forward, and instead of throwing his initial attack, he basically puts up a parry. And the reason he puts that parry up is because he's expecting me to throw the same hand shot that I threw in the previous exchange, meaning that I have successfully once again gotten Aiden to at least hesitate in his initial attack. However, he comes out of this parry very quickly and throws a feinted attack up high. Lucky again for me, this is something that I recognized, and rather than throwing up a hard parry on the initial attack, I read that it is a feint, throw my left Svarkow, and get a similar result to what happened when this happened before. I get a clean hit to the hands, Aiden comes down on top of my sword. Lucky for me, he didn't manage to hit my hands this time, although looking at the replay, he might have gotten a good chunk of them. And I get 2 clean points. So at this point, I've managed to claw my way back from a bit of a deficit, and we've tied it up at 7 points each. However, if you know from this rule set, it would go to 10 points, meaning that, considering we could get 3 points off of a clean shot to the head or a thrust to the torso above the bind, we are both within range of winning the fight. Now, what this also means is that, given what I mentioned earlier about the double rule, there was a really good reason to be afraid of doubles up until this point, but now, with 3 points on the line and the potential win and 3rd place on every single exchange, you have to be very, very careful about when you don't go for a deep target. As a result, a combination of all the things I mentioned, plus the idea that I'm still trying to figure out how to stop Aiden's forward momentum, I go for a Hail Mary left plow thrust straight to the face. And frankly, I didn't care much whether or not I got doubled. And I did. I got doubled straight in the head. The reason I got doubled, of course, is because by going forward and throwing that Hail Mary thrust straight to the face, I was banking that Aiden was going to throw up a parry or a feint. And he didn't. But if he had, there was that chance that I would have landed my thrust. He would have been a little out of tempo with his follow-up, and I would have gotten the 3 points it took to win. Aiden, of course, probably had the exact same idea, not feinting and not blocking as he walked forward, and instead just throwing a big cut straight to the head. Why? Because we both wanted to end the fight, we both wanted to win, and we both knew that doubles really wouldn't affect anything at this point. So we doubled. And it doesn't look great, and it looks pretty ugly, but at the very least, I didn't turn the back of my head, right? No, I did. I did in this particular case because I had rammed a sword into Aiden's right shoulder, and the force of it pushing me back turned my body to my left. And lucky for me, the judges gave me a pass on this because I did basically get hit in the back of the head on this exchange. So if you think it's come back to bite me full circle, well, you'd be wrong because you'll never guess what happens in the next exchange. So the score is still tied 7-7, and I am still in Hail Mary double mode. However, I get my wish, essentially, from the previous exchange. I throw a thrust straight to Aiden's chest, and he feints. He walks forward and feints an attack or feints a parry, or I don't really care. But I land that thrust straight in his chest as he's doing something other than attacking me. And it's worthless. It doesn't mean anything. This is not a right-of-way tournament. Attack and preparation doesn't protect me, which means that despite the fact that I have just stabbed Aiden in the chest, he is free to come down and clobber me right in the head, the back of the head, because, once again, after I have landed this thrust, I have attempted to protect myself by winding my arms into my upper right opening, and doing so causes me to turn my body and my head. So, despite the fact that I was not able to protect myself at all, I get hit pretty much in the back of the head. I'm fine. Aiden didn't really need to pull the strike because at the end of the day, my back of the head protection is actually pretty decent. And he really hits me more on the shoulder than the actual neck, but not a great idea for other people to do. And finally, my chickens have come home to roost in the turn to the back of the head department because at this point, I am given a formal yellow card, meaning that I and my action before the turn to the back of the head does not count. My thrust gets no points, and Aiden gets a clean shot to what is very lucky for me is the arm opening. Pretty much the only reason I didn't lose the fight right here and right now is because Sean made a mistake and gave him only 2 points for a shot to the arm rather than 3 points for a shot to the back of my head. I deserved to lose this fight right there, but I didn't. Instead, he gave him 2 points and he went to 9. So for the next exchange, we are still tied at 7, and wait a minute, didn't I just say that he got 2 points for that? Oh wait, I lied. You see, for some reason, despite the fact that I got a yellow card and my portion of the exchange was thrown out, Sean forgot to give Aiden any points. I don't even know if this was necessarily on purpose, but at the end of the day, it is still tied 7-7. And I'm only pointing this out because in this next exchange, which we don't get to see a whole lot of because of the camera angle, I think I throw a cut to the hand, which kind of hits the hand. Maybe not so great, but you hear the sound. And then Aiden throws a follow-up cut to the hand. Again, you hear the sound, but you can't really see whether it lands. And instead of it being ruled a double or an initial action from me or whatever, they give Aiden 1 point for a cut to the hand with an afterblow. Which normally doesn't really matter so much, except that if he had gotten his 2 points from the previous exchange, that would have won him the fight again. So that's the second time I had a potential judge decision hand me the ability to continue fighting and not lose the fight. And, well, it's all going to come to a head here in the final exchange. So it's the final exchange. The final exchange because it's the final exchange where anybody scores points, and those points are mine. I walk forward and essentially guess correctly. Previously, I had thrown a Hail Mary left plow thrust, which essentially winds from the left plow to the left ox, and is basically designed to zone out anything that's coming onto my left side. However, this time, I throw a Hail Mary right ox thrust, which means it's much better at defending me from things that come on my right side, which, as luck would have it, is the exact cut that Aiden throws at me. So, I take a step forward, I wind up into my right ox, it's really kind of my left ox, but it's on the right side of my head for the most part. I land that thrust straight into the middle of Aiden's chest. I then proceed to start walking past him and expose the back of my head again. Only this time, because the thrust is still stuck in his chest when he goes to throw a follow-up cut, my sword is just 100% way in the way, and he can't pull anything off. So, I get my clean thrust, I get my 3 points, I get my win. But what did it cost? And if you remember, there are a couple times where maybe Aiden probably should have won this fight already, twice. And as far as this exchange goes, it's pretty clearly my exchange. But there's another question here about turning the back of the head. Now, this entire time I've been doing it quite a lot. But there's a bit of a difference, at least in my opinion, between some of the turns that I did and others. This last one, for example, was probably about as defended as the back of my head could ever be. The sword was planted in my opponent's chest and bent so far that it turned into a U which managed to stay there for a solid 2 seconds after it landed, long enough that when Aiden threw a follow-up cut, the only thing he had to hit was my U-shaped sword. So I'm not exactly 100% sure what I could have done better about this that wouldn't have ended with me exposing the back of my head. Sure, I could have tried to plant my feet and physically turn my torso towards Aiden the entire time, but the problem with this is that when someone gets a thrust landed against them, it pushes your hands backwards. And the combination of being pushed backwards turns your body. In my opinion, it's basically impossible for me to have not exposed the back of my head on this exchange. And despite the fact that I will fully admit that I did so very inappropriately previous times in this fight, I don't think this was one of them. But what do you do about it? As a director, as a referee, and as someone who makes rules for tournaments, how do you differentiate between someone who turned the back of the head because they had to, and turned the back of the head because they did something stupid, and turned the back of the head because they did something stupid but got away with it, maybe? It's hard to delineate between those three situations, but maybe at the end of the day, that's something everybody has to do on their own. But if you think I'm a dirty, cheating sport fencer who turns the back of the head and robbed my friend of a victory and a third place medal, feel free to say so down in the comments. I'd probably even agree with you this time. Otherwise, I'll see you next Tuesday.